Russ Hunt, pollster and founder of Hunt Research. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Jack, and thanks for meeting with me.
Absolutely. So you dug into the results of the 2024 election that we just had, and what did you find?
Well, I think it's fascinating. There's no question that the election is a mandate for President Trump, for Texas Republicans and conservatives all across the spectrum of the right. We have 312 electoral votes for the president nationally, a win with 56% of the vote and over a 14% margin here in the state of Texas, and wins up and down the ballot for Texas Republicans all around the state. 2 state house seats picked up, a third very close, a state senate seat picked up. And so Republicans, I think, are riding very, very high on this victory. And I think that they're right to think they have a mandate as a result of this election. And then the question that arises then, I think, that's very important to remember is, who is the mandate from and what is the mandate for? And I think in Texas, as around the nation, the answers to those questions are not really immediately obvious. Often, whether it's Democrats or Republicans who have a big win, the response is often to assume that all of the most extreme policies of our party are the ones which are endorsed by this election, and we should push as far as we can in one direction. And I think you'll see movements in that direction at the national level and also the state level. What I found, though, in analyzing the results of this election, analyzing who turned out, and some of the changes in the outcome relative to 2020, are that the mandate that Republicans have seems to arise not so much from their party base as from how uniquely persuasive they were in this election with independent voters, and also from the way in which many Democrats seem quite dissatisfied with their presidential nominee. So if you break down the movement that President Trump experienced relative to 2020, he improved a great deal in his margins over that election. Almost 1 million more votes in terms of his margin over Kamala Harris versus his margin over Joe Biden. However, by my calculations, if you look at who turned out to vote, only 5% of Trump's gains since 2020, his improvement since the last election, can be ascribed to turnout of hardcore Republicans.
So those are your primary voters.
That's right. Yeah, if you look at primary voters, only about 50,000 more primary voter votes were cast by Republicans in 2024 than in 2020. And that's nothing to turn up one's nose at. It made a big difference. But the bigger factors by far were Democrats staying home and independents swinging disproportionately to the right.
And when you talk about independents, they're not talking about necessarily people who are independent, but you're talking about people who didn't show up for the primaries.
That's right, yeah. In Texas, since we don't have party registration, if you look at your registration card, it won't say Republican or Democrat. We determine whether you're a Republican or Democrat by which primary you vote in. And so people who participate in Republican primaries tend to vote for Trump and other Republicans and Senator Cruz. And those who participate in the Democratic primary overwhelmingly voted for Kamala Harris and for Colin Allred. And then there's everyone else, everyone who only shows up for the general elections. And so by my account, those voters accounted for 74% of Trump's gains relative to 2020.
Is that a new trend?
It's definitely new from 2020. So I think in many previous elections, turnout was decided by the independents. As Texas, though, has become more and more partisan, and the number of primary voters we have has increased, it's become more and more of a partisan mobilization battle, where each side is just striving to turn out its base. This year, something different did happen. The Democrats really did fail to turn out their voters. So more than three.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, I just mean as far as like the Democrats, I mean, we're talking about the large counties, right? We're talking about Dallas County, we're talking about Harris County, we're talking about Travis County and Bexar County, right?
That's right, Jack. Yeah, urban turnout fell precipitously. And to take the city of Dallas as an example, within the city limits, turnout was 65% in 2020. That fell to just over 50% in this election. Tremendous fall. But we also see it elsewhere around the state. So in South Texas, where Republicans experienced tremendous gains all the way from Brownsville to El Paso, flipping counties have been blue for decades. turnout was barely over 50%.
Mm.
Now, among those who did turn out to vote, the conservative-leaning independents, people who, if you asked them, would probably say they were Republican, turned out in droves, and the Republican primary voters turned out. But a lot of the Democrats stayed home. And so as Republicans and everyone in Texas sort of sits back to reflect, well, what did this election mean? What should we do moving forward in policy and in party brand? I think the two big factors for everyone to consider are, why did all those Democrats stay home? More than 3 out of every 10 Democrats stayed home in this election. And why did all the conservative independents come out to vote for Republicans? And why did so many of the liberal-leaning independents choose to stay at home? And so I think those questions are the questions that are really going to define the 2026 election cycle. And
How
also
so?
the legislative session.
How so?
Well, I mean, on the Democratic side, you saw low turnout, especially among certain groups, urban areas, but especially young voters, voters of color, tended to stay home in larger numbers as well. And many of those who showed up, especially in South Texas, voted Republican. And I think that is a sign that the Democratic Party has lost touch with working class Texans. And they've also lost touch with many young Texans. Some of this has to do with COVID and disappointment over, I think, COVID restrictions. But a lot of it, I think, has to do with a sense among Texas voters and voters around the nation that the Democrats focus on social issues and a certain presumption to bureaucratic control on the part of the Democratic Party are not advancing the interests of the American people. Concretely, you saw that here in the city of Dallas, if you look at the results of some of the city propositions. A Proposition C to increase pay for the mayor and city council was roundly rejected by voters of Dallas. And then 2 other propositions that were bucking the trend of the city establishment by demanding more funding for public safety, and also by demanding more accountability and the ability of citizens to sue the city government. These propositions passed, even though Mayor Leppert, Mayor Rawlings, and many other figures of the Dallas establishment lined up against them. And guess why the propositions passed? They passed because South Dallas voted overwhelmingly in favor of those propositions and against pay. And so that's just one example of how the Democratic establishment, I think, has lost the faith of the American working class.
So what do they need to do, in your estimation, to regain that?
I think they have the same, in a certain respect, the same task that some of the Republicans have, which is to try to listen to what it is that people wanted in this election. What were the priorities? In our surveys that we ran, we saw that voters were concerned about the economy and inflation. More and more, they just wanted a government that focused on providing the basics for people, the ability to have prices that aren't always rising, the ability to have guarantees of public safety, to have a good and growing economy. And Republicans in this election did a better job showing that they cared about those things, and they had real policy proposals to make them better.
And I'm wondering, because you mentioned before that there were so many general election voters who supported now President-elect Trump and Senator Cruz, et cetera, and Republican candidates up and down the ballot, what does that say about what's coming? Because we've got the legislative session, we've got 2026, which, Senator Cornyn's up, all the statewide elected officials are up. So what does that say? They don't have carte blanche, do they, to just do what they want?
That's right. That's right.
So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, they have a mandate, right? Because the other side failed. Democrats didn't show up. They weren't delivering. But they don't have carte blanche, right? Because voters want solutions that are pragmatic. They want solutions, especially to fiscal problems. And they want a kind of government that is not focused on sort of fringe ideological issues, but is focused on getting back to sort of practical basics in government. I think what happened in the Valley down in South Texas is a great example of this. For a long time, Republicans had tried to appeal to the Hispanic voters in the Valley on social issues. And they didn't fail. And there were a lot of pro-life Hispanic Democrats in South Texas, but they remained Democrat. They voted with the Republicans on pro-life bills and things like that, but they didn't change their partisan affiliation. What it took to do that was all the excesses of the Biden administration nationally and tone deafness of Texas Democrats locally. Those are the things that made South Texas Hispanics decide, okay, we're all Republican now. And so as Republicans move forward into the legislative session, they need to think about, what is our brand? Especially now as the midterms approach. Historically, whenever a party has control of the presidency and the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives, the midterms are usually not pretty, because we will do things as Republicans that Democrats and many independents won't like. And so Texas Republicans have now a choice in their legislative session. Do we follow the lead of national Republicans and push as far as possible and pour it through as many extreme pieces of legislation as we can while we still can? Or do we try to establish a separate brand identity from national Republicans? One that will allow many of our state officials to survive what may be a very adverse environment for Republicans in the midterm.
So focus on the kitchen table issues.
Focus on the kitchen table issues. Focus on a lot of what has made Texas so successful already. I think Governor Abbott, just announced yesterday that they're quintupling the number of launches that are going to be allowed for SpaceX, from 5 to 25. Just announced another major corporate relocation to Texas. These are the kinds of things that I think really matter a lot to all Texans, and especially the independent voters who came out and voted in frustration against the Democrats. And that's not to say that the fabric of society isn't important. I think there are institutions like education, public safety, and transportation. The reform and strengthening of all these things is vital. But Republicans will have the ability, Texas state Republicans do have the opportunity here to establish separation from the federal brand. We saw that a little bit already in a lot of the election results. So President Trump, of course, did very well with a historic performance, improving his vote share by more than 4% over 2016, to say nothing of 2020. But many of the down ballot Republicans actually still got more vote share than he did. So a lot of the state reps who won tightly contested races, like John Lujan in San Antonio, Angie Chin Button up here, outperformed him by several percentage points, as did many of the Supreme Court justice candidates and the judicial candidates. And what that tells me as a political analyst is that there's a solid 5 to 6% of voters in the state who will vote for a Texas Republican, even if maybe they won't vote for a national Republican. And if the Republicans want to continue to be successful in Texas long term, their focus in the legislative session needs to be on growing that 5 to 6% and making it 7, 8, maybe even 10%. A buffer that will give them the ability to withstand any degree of blowback that occurs in 2026.
Ross Hunt, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.
We appreciate it.
My pleasure.